I got fired from Michelin restaurant because guests said that my dish was cooked badly. After 2 weeks, he fired me to be his private cook at home. I worked as a sous chef in a Michelin-starred restaurant in London for 3 years. The place was intense. 16-hour shifts, constant pressure to deliver perfection, and a head chef who'd scream if a plate wasn't flawless. I loved it, though. Cooking at that level felt like a high-stakes game, and I was good at it. My sauces were always on point, my plating was clean, and I could handle the rush of a fully booked Saturday night without breaking a sweat. The restaurant was a big deal, always packed with wealthy diners, critics, and the occasional celebrity. Getting a job there was a dream, and I worked my ass off to prove I belonged. One night, about 6 months ago, I was running the pass during a busy dinner service. We had a VIP table, some rich guy with a reputation for being picky. He ordered the lamb, my signature dish. I'd spent years perfecting it, slow cooked for hours, paired with a rosemary just that took 2 days to reduce. I checked every plate myself before it went out, and his looked perfect. The server took it to his table, and I moved on to the next order, thinking nothing of it. About 20 minutes later, the server came back, looking nervous. The guy said the lamb was overcooked and tasteless. He didn't send it back, just left it half-eaten and made a big deal about it to the front of house staff. I was pissed, but kept my cool. You can't please everyone, right? Mistakes happen, or maybe he just had bad taste. The next day, the head chef called me into his office. He said the guy was a regular, some hedge fund millionaire, and his complaint was a big deal. I explained I'd checked the dish myself, but he wasn't having it. He said the restaurant's reputation was on the line, and I needed to step up. I took the warning and went back to work, but it stung. I'd never had a complaint like that before. For the next week, I double-checked everything, tasted every component, and made sure my station was flawless. Service went smoothly, and I thought the whole thing was behind me. Then, 2 weeks later, I got called into the office again. The head chef was sitting there with the restaurant manager. They didn't waste time. They said they were letting me go. The millionaire had come back, complained again about another dish, not even mine this time, and mentioned my name specifically. They didn't give me a chance to explain. They said they couldn't risk more bad feedback from someone like him. I was stunned. 3 years of grinding, and I was out because of one guy's opinion. I packed up my knives, left my apron in the locker, and walked out. I didn't argue or beg. I was too angry to even speak. I spent the next few days in a fog. I didn't tell my friends or family. I was too embarrassed. I just sat in my flat, scrolling job boards and drinking cheap wine. I'd gone from working in one of the best kitchens in the city to unemployed in a matter of weeks. I kept replaying that night in my head, wondering if I'd missed something with the lamb. Maybe I'd been sloppy. Maybe I wasn't as good as I thought. The self-doubt was brutal. I didn't know what to do next. Cooking was my life, but the idea of starting over somewhere else felt impossible. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call. It was from a private number, and I almost didn't pick up. When I did, the voice on the other end introduced himself as the millionaire's assistant. I braced myself, thinking they were going to rub it in or complain again. Instead, she said her boss wanted to meet me, not at the restaurant, but at his house. I was confused. Why would this guy who got me fired want to see me? She wouldn't give details, just said he'd explain in person and that it was worth my time. I didn't trust it, but I was curious. Plus, I had nothing to lose. I agreed to meet him the next day at his mansion in Kensington. I had no idea what I was walking into, but something told me this wasn't the end of my story. The next day, I took the tube to Kensington, still unsure why I was even going. The millionaire's assistant had texted me an address, and when I got there, I was floored. The house was massive. White stone, tall windows, the kind of place you see in movies about old money. I felt out of place in my jeans and jacket, like I was about to get kicked out for trespassing. I rang the bell, and the assistant, a woman in her 30s with a clipboard and a no-nonsense vibe, let me in. She led me through a hallway with marble floors and paintings that probably cost more than my rent for a year. I tried to act normal, but my nerves were shot. She took me to a study where the millionaire was waiting. He was in his 50s, tall, with salt and pepper hair, and a suit that looked custom-made. He stood up, shook my hand, and introduced himself as Richard. No last name, just Richard. He didn't act like someone who'd gotten me fired. He was calm, almost friendly, and offered me a seat. I sat down, still waiting for the catch. He started talking about food, asking me about my training, my favorite dishes, and how I ended up at the Michelin restaurant. It felt like a job interview, but I couldn't figure out why he cared. I answered politely, keeping my guard up. Then he got to the point. He said he'd been eating at the restaurant for years and always noticed my dishes. He claimed the lamb he complained about wasn't bad. It was just an excuse to get me out of there. I was stunned. He said he'd been looking for a private chef for his family and thought I'd be perfect. He didn't want to poach me directly, so he pushed the restaurant to let me go. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This guy had ruined my career on purpose, and now he was acting like it was a favor. I wanted to tell him off, but I held back. I needed to hear him out. He laid out the offer. He wanted me to work for him full-time, cooking for his family of four and occasional dinner parties. The pay was double what I'd made at the restaurant, plus a room in a staff apartment nearby. I'd have my own kitchen, top-of-the-line equipment, and a budget for ingredients that made my head spin. He said I'd have creative control, as long as I could handle his kids' picky tastes and his wife's dietary restrictions. It sounded too good to be true, but I was still angry. I asked why he didn't just ask me to work for him instead of getting me fired. He shrugged and said he didn't think I'd leave a Michelin kitchen willingly. He wasn't wrong, but it still felt like a dirty move. I told him I needed time to think. He nodded, said to take a week, and had his assistant show me out. Walking back to the tube, my head was all over the place. The money was tempting, and the setup sounded like a chef's dream. But working for someone who'd manipulated me like that, it didn't sit right. I kept thinking about how he'd played the restaurant, how he'd played me. I wondered if he'd pull something like that again. At the same time, I was broke, unemployed, and running out of options. Starting over at another restaurant would mean lower pay and longer hours, and I wasn't sure I had it in me. When I got home, I called my best friend from culinary school. I told him everything, expecting him to say I should take the job. Instead, he said to be careful. He'd heard stories about private chefs getting burned out working for rich families. Crazy demands, no boundaries, and no life outside the job. He said the money might not be worth it if Richard was already playing games. That stuck with me. I spent the next few days weighing it all. I looked up Richard online, but there wasn't much. Just some articles about his hedge fund and a few photos at charity events. Nothing that told me who he really was. By the end of the week, I still hadn't decided. I kept imagining myself in that fancy kitchen, cooking without the chaos of a restaurant. Then I'd remember how I got there, and the anger would creep back. Finally, I called the assistant and said I'd take the job, but only on a trial basis. I figured a month would be enough to see if it was worth it. She sounded pleased and said I could start the following Monday. I hung up, feeling like I'd made a deal with the devil. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I was about to find out. I started working for Richard on a Monday, walking into his Kensington mansion with my knives and a knot in my stomach. The kitchen was unreal, bigger than my flat, with a gleaming 8-burner range, a walk-in fridge, and a pantry stocked with ingredients I'd only dreamed of using. The assistant gave me a rundown of the family's preferences. Richard liked bold flavors. His wife was gluten-free, their teenage daughter was vegan, and their 10-year-old son only ate chicken nuggets and pasta. I'd have to cook for them daily, plus prep for occasional dinner parties. The trial period was 1 month, and I was determined to make it work, even if I still didn't trust Richard. The first week was a blur. I spent hours planning menus, trying to balance everyone's needs. Richard's wife sent back her first meal, a quinoa salad, saying it was too bland. I tweaked it with more herbs and lemon, and she approved the next try. The daughter liked my vegan stir-fry but complained if I repeated dishes. The son was easy, nuggets every day, but I snuck in some vegetables by blending them into the sauce. Richard was the least picky, always praising my work, especially the braised short ribs I made for him. He'd linger in the kitchen sometimes, asking about my process or telling me about restaurants he'd visited. It was weirdly friendly, but I kept my distance. I still hadn't forgotten how I ended up here. By the second week, I settled into a routine. I'd get to the house at 10 a.m., prep lunch and dinner, and leave by 8 p.m. The staff apartment was a short walk away, a small but nice place with a view of the city. The pay hit my account on time, and it was as good as Richard promised. I started to relax, thinking maybe this could work. Then came my first dinner party. Richard invited 12 guests, all business types, and wanted a 5-course menu showcasing British ingredients. I spent 2 days sourcing local seafood, game, and produce, then pulled an all-nighter to perfect the dessert, a blackberry tart with lavender cream. The night went off without a hitch. Guests raved, Richard shook my hand, and I felt like I was back in my element. But things got complicated in the third week. Richard started asking for more. He wanted late-night snacks when he worked in his study, or breakfast trays at 6 a.m. if he had early calls. His wife began requesting meal plans a week in advance, then changing her mind last minute. The daughter decided she was over veganism and wanted fish, which threw off my prep. The son was still fine with nuggets, but even he started getting bored. I was cooking around the clock, and the creative control Richard promised felt like a myth. I was exhausted, barely sleeping, and starting to wonder if my friend was right about private chef burnout. Then, during the final week of the trial, Richard called me into his study. I braced myself, thinking he was going to criticize something. Instead, he said he was thrilled with my work and wanted me to stay permanently. He offered a raise, more vacation days, and a bigger budget for ingredients. He also apologized for getting me fired, admitting it was a clumsy move. I was floored. It was the first time he'd acknowledged it directly, and it seemed genuine. He said he saw potential in me and wanted me to grow with his family. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and said I'd think about it. That night, I sat in my apartment weighing my options. The job was intense, but the money and resources were unmatched. I could save up, maybe start my own place one day. But the demands were relentless, and I wasn't sure I could trust Richard long term. I thought about the restaurant, how I'd loved the chaos of service but hated the politics. This job was different. It was quieter, more personal, but it came with its own games. I decided to stay, but I set boundaries. I told Richard I'd sign on permanently only if I had fixed hours and more say in the menu. To my surprise, he agreed. Looking back, I'm still not sure if I made the right call. The job's been good for my bank account, but it's a grind in its own way. Richard's family is demanding, and I'm always on call, even with the new boundaries. Still, I'm cooking at a level I never could have in a restaurant, and I'm learning to navigate the weird world of the ultra rich. It's not the life I planned, but it's mine now.